Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm going up against some anti-vaxxers, and this might be the start of a lengthy series if it catches on and if I feel like continuing it. We'll see how it goes. Anyways, I have a feeling that the original producers of this documentary will be rather trigger-happy with the DMCA button, so to cover my own ass, I'm going to be skipping as much of their video as I can without distorting it. In order to watch it in full, you do need to sign up for this Ty Bollinger guy's mailing list, and then they send you a schedule of when you can watch it all, unless you send them money. And then for the low price of $147, you can watch it anytime you like, at your convenience. You know, because they care about public health and all that. I will leave a link to their sign-up page down below to make it as easy for you to fact-check me as I can, but I'm going to try and keep their content to a minimum. So let's go.
Welcome back to The Truth About Vaccines, episode number 2. Are you familiar with the ingredients in the CDC's recommended vaccine schedule today?
Fairly.
Did the polio vaccine eradicate polio?
Yes.
These questions and many more will be answered in tonight's episode.
So in this episode, you're going to answer the question of whether or not I am familiar with current vaccine ingredients? How exactly do you know how familiar I am with them?
The goal of The Truth About Vaccines is to present this information in as clear, precise, accurate, yet unbiased method as is humanly possible.
I have my doubts about the unbiased part of that statement. We shall see.
Focusing on the science, creating awareness, evaluating studies to determine whether or not vaccines are safe and effective. We also will be addressing the fundamental topic of freedom of choice. So let's get rolling with tonight's episode. Many of the studies indicating that vaccines are safe are epidemiological studies. Here's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. explaining the concept of epidemiology.
Epidemiology is the study of populations and the impact, for example, of an environmental condition or toxin on an entire population. So what epidemiologists try to do is they look at the population that was exposed to the toxin and they examine the health outcomes, and then they look at an unexposed population, which are called the controls. But epidemiology is notoriously susceptible to manipulation. Okay. You could design an epidemiology study that proved that sex does not make you pregnant. How would you do that? You would eliminate all the pregnant people before you did the study.
So as part of your unbiased look into vaccine efficacy, your first step is poisoning the well against an entire field of science. Great. Now, I, as a layman, am aware that epidemiology is not perfect. So from that, I feel safe assuming that the people who run epidemiology studies for a living are also aware of that. They have ways of testing epidemiological studies for validity, and it's not like they just start administering untested vaccines to people, wait 20 years, and then check back to test the results. These things are rigorously tested on lab animals for years before they even have a chance of seeing a human being, and then it will be years of small voluntary tests before becoming available to the general public. So basically, they make sure the vaccines actually work and that the positive consequences far outweigh the negative ones well before the public sees the vaccine. And further epidemiological studies are performed to confirm the vaccine's efficacy and to look into possible improvements to increase a vaccine's efficacy rate.
So that you just ended up studying people who were having a lot of sex, but nobody was getting pregnant. Ergo, sex doesn't make you pregnant.
I don't think you could get that conclusion just by eliminating pregnant women from the beginning of the study. In fact, I think that eliminating already pregnant women would help make the study more reliable, as they would have been looking into the cause of pregnancy. And if the study were large enough, it would be found that the only subgroup of people that had zero pregnancy rate were the ones who were abstaining from sex. See how that works?
So, and that's what they did with these epidemiology studies that the CDC orchestrated. They eliminated the populations that had autism before they did the study.
Now wait a goddamn minute. Do you have a source for that? Which study are you referring to? I found one from the New England Journal of Medicine in which they studied more than 300,000 children, around 50,000 of which were not vaccinated, and found that there was no difference in autism rates between vaccinated and unvaccinated children. They did eliminate children from the study who either had autism before being vaccinated or who had certain other conditions that are associated with autism and are already known to be genetic. But that's hardly just putting aside all the autistic children. Going back to the pregnancy analogy, if they kept the previously pregnant ladies in the study, how are they going to find the cause of pregnancy? They're already pregnant when the study begins. Therefore, studying pregnancy must cause pregnancy. I also found an article in the UK medical journal The Lancet, which studied the diagnoses of cases of autism to see if there was a change once the MMR vaccine was introduced. The diagnoses of autism had been steadily rising, but it was rising before the vaccine was introduced, and there was no jump in diagnoses after the vaccine was introduced. Also, keep in mind, this is coming from a person whose credentials you list as radio host, author, activist, and environmental attorney. I don't see anything about being a statistician or a scientist.
I used to work for Merck. I sold Vioxx for them, 2001 to 2003, along with other drugs, and I really saw from the inside how shady and unethical things are done.
I'm going to skip this for you, but before I do, I just wanted you to see how shady and unethical this documentary is. She was a fucking sales representative. It was her job to convince doctors to buy their product. And when she's talking about seeing shady practices at Merck, they're showing some stock footage of scientists doing tests of some kind. As a sales rep, what scientific trials was she a part of where she witnessed these shady goings-on? Can you name one, please? Now that you've failed to show me your crooked science that she witnessed in her job as a sales rep, show me a company that encourages their sales reps to be completely honest about the product that they're selling, even if they tell a customer bad things about the product. You won't find one. I've been in sales. Every company drills into its reps how amazing their product is and how different it is from all the other competitors. They're usually not different at all. I would be very surprised if you could find me one company with a completely honest sales team. Find me an actual scientist who is blowing whistles on Merck, then you can have my attention.
I asked Barbara Lowe Fisher, the head of the National Vaccine Information Center, to elaborate on clinical trials and vaccine testing.
These clinical trials are very small, relatively small, and they're also cleansed in that the participants in vaccine trials often do not reflect the population that gets the vaccine after it's licensed. They whitewash it. How? Well, children who are sick at the time of vaccination don't get vaccinated.
Well, I don't know about the States, but in Canada they won't give you a vaccine if you're sick, so that's taken care of.
Lots of kids get vaccinated when they're sick in this country.
Source, please.
Children who have severe allergies, who have brain and immune system disorders.
They are generally informed of the increased risk of vaccination with their allergies and whatnot. That part of the population is actually the main reason why vaccination among those who are able to safely be vaccinated is so important to public health. Their health is dependent on other people getting their vaccines.
They aren't in those trials, but a lot of kids like that get vaccines. All of them do.
All of them? Really? You're telling me that 100% of children with severe allergies, brain, and immune system disorders get their vaccines? I'm calling bullshit here. Just a tip for you, if you want people to believe you, don't resort to wild hyperbole that is obviously false. It makes people wonder what else you might be exaggerating, or heaven forbid, actually lying about.
In these clinical trials, they'll often use a active placebo instead of an inactive placebo.
That was really one of the real surprising elements to me when I started to research, because conventionally, I worked in a lab, I know what a placebo should be. It should be an inert substance that has no physiological effect.
This is Dr. Suzanne Humphreys. She is a kidney doctor. She has spent some 2 years in a biochemistry lab as head technician. Down below, I will link to an article written by Dr. David Gorski, who has run a medical research lab for the last 12 years, where he spends an amusing few pages ripping Suzanne to shreds. Basically, she became a homeopath and went down the rabbit hole of quackery. I'm going to skip her part here, as all she basically says is that in placebo-controlled vaccine trials, the placebo is often a different vaccine. She doesn't seem to understand the problem with not vaccinating a bunch of kids against the measles and then exposing them to the measles to see how they hold up when compared to the vaccinated children.
Talk about the way that vaccines are cultured, the substrates. I mean,
Sure.
Just go into the details about that, because many people are unaware.
Yeah, well, they'll use chicken embryos, monkey kidney tissue, renal tissue from dogs, animals like this, aborted fetal tissue.
So now we're getting to the foreign tissue issue. Let's start with the basics. Firstly, the reason animal, and in some cases human, tissue is used is basically as a food source for whatever virus or bacteria they're trying to vaccinate against. They need to grow the virus in order to manipulate it in a way to make it safe to be injected, but still recognizable as a threat by your immune system. So it's germ food, basically. There are only a handful of vaccines that use aborted fetal tissue, and it's not done in the way that they're insinuating here. They're trying to make it sound like scientists are aborting babies left, right, and center just for the vaccines. What's actually happening is that there are 2 cell colonies kept alive and breeding for this purpose, from 2 abortions, one in 1962 and the other in 1966. The cells that are alive from them now are so far removed from the actual abortion event that even the Catholic Church has declared them morally A-OK.
They, of course, have to neutralize these things with toxic chemicals like formaldehyde, which is embalming fluid. Sometimes other forms of antibiotics are utilized in the production. Heavy metals to create an adjuvant kind of thing to aggravate the immune system so that they can use smaller amounts of the antigen.
Yeah, I was curious why they called this guy doctor, so I looked up the degree they have listed, and I couldn't find it anywhere, like not even on the lists of alternative medical degrees. I did find that HOM is for homeopathy, as you might expect, so basically this guy is a quack who doesn't know what he's talking about. Let's talk about those scary words he just threw out there, starting with formaldehyde, the toxic chemical embalming fluid. As it turns out, formaldehyde is actually essential to the synthesis of DNA and amino acids, as in, we would all die without it. As such, there is always formaldehyde present in every person's bloodstream, and the amount in your bloodstream are significantly higher than those found in any vaccines. An infant would have approximately 1.1 milligrams of it in their blood at any given moment. The highest found in any vaccine is 0.7 milligrams in the meningococcal vaccine. With regards to antibiotics in vaccines, the concern there is with allergic reactions. The reason for antibiotics is to prevent bacterial contamination in the manufacturing process. The antibiotics that they use are not the same ones that usually cause allergic reactions. A reaction is still possible, but the odds of it happening are infinitesimally small, and once a child reacts, they are no longer encouraged to vaccinate. These are the children that benefit from other children being vaccinated.
In 2005, the FDA put out a report about the contaminants of foreign DNA in vaccines. And they said in their presentation, we do not know if any of the contaminants that we know exist in vaccines from foreign DNA will lead to the development of any event. And they left it as an event because they didn't know what event that would lead to.
I know this sounds scary and all, but did you know that you put foreign DNA in your body every time you eat? Do you know that when you have a viral infection, the virus is actually injecting its DNA into your cells to change how they behave, and that vaccines stop that from happening? And any animal DNA that makes it into the vaccine just basically sits there until your body disposes of it, as in like, pee or poop, that sort of thing. Also, while researching DNA in vaccines, I stumbled upon a fairly new type of vaccine, which is actually a DNA vaccine. It sounds pretty cool. Basically, you get injected with genetically engineered DNA, which causes your cells to directly produce the antigen for whatever you're being vaccinated against. It's still working through all the safety tests and is currently only publicly available for veterinary use, but in animal studies, DNA vaccines have been successful in preventing infections by viruses ranging from the common flu to HIV. So yeah, foreign DNA actually looks like the future of vaccines, and that future is pretty fucking awesome. And just to let you know how slow and tedious the process of developing safe vaccines is, DNA vaccines were invented in the early 1990s, and have not yet even made it to human trials. Also, DNA vaccines don't require all the adjuvant ingredients that you guys are so scared of, so it'd be actually a lot safer.
whether a takeover of the DNA in the body, cancer, cell death, inflammation,
ulcers, internal bleeding, erectile dysfunction, hallucinations. See? I can throw out a bunch of medical terms that have no connection to foreign DNA in vaccines too. Do you have any evidence that connects any of these things, or are you just fear-mongering?
What's Titron X100? Dow Chemical. It's a Dow Chemical surfactant in your household cleaner, in your industrial cleaner, in your paint. It's in your pesticides, Ty. It's a surfactant.
Your tone of voice there suggests that you are under the impression that surfactants are all horrible, horrible toxic chemicals that will only ever cause harm. Well, I hate to break it to you, but if you brush your teeth, you're putting surfactants in your mouth. And in much greater quantities than you will ever find in vaccines, probably multiple times per day. A surfactant is any substance that tends to reduce the surface tension of a liquid in which it's dissolved. Interestingly, when I was searching for examples of natural surfactants, I found an eBay store selling polysorbate 80 as a natural surfactant, which is a chemical that is used in vaccines for the same reason as Triton X100, and which you get to later in your documentary. Link down below for an article by Dr. David Gorski about the use of Triton X100 and polysorbate 80 in vaccines. Spoiler, they are not used at levels that are considered toxic. If there's one thing that anti-vaxxers are incapable of understanding, it's dosage levels. Anything becomes a poison at too high a dose, including water. Drinking too much water can kill you. Therefore, you should never drink anything containing water. It's bad. See the problem?
And that's in your flu shot. And here's the thing. I don't care this whole concept of parts per billion. It doesn't make sense to me. If it's a toxic chemical, it's a toxic chemical.
I love that the little thing at the bottom of the screen popped up calling him a doctor, just as he states boldly that he doesn't understand the concept of parts per million. Like what I just said, water at a high enough dosage is a toxic chemical. You just said it doesn't matter. If it's toxic, keep it away from you. Have fun dying of dehydration, buddy. I'm going to skip the rest of this guy because, well, and can anyone take him seriously after he boldly proclaims that he doesn't understand how the dosage of a chemical can change how that chemical affects the body? Go back to high school, buddy.
Let's take two people. One person, person A, let's say, strong immune system, can respond to an infection, can respond to the presence of a virus and build their own antibodies, right? Person A. Now let's say there's person Z, immunosuppressed, living on junk food, vitamin D deficient, gets sick every winter, thinks they need a vaccine, all right? Now, person A, remember, strong response. Do they need a vaccine against the flu? The answer is no, because if they're exposed to the flu, they're going to immunize themselves.
But while their immune system is busy developing its antibodies, they will be passing the virus on to others who don't have their awesome immune system. You know, like the elderly, which is a demographic that often dies from the flu virus. Good job, asshole. You just killed grandma.
Right? So, because they have a strong response. Person Z, if they get the vaccine, does it work? The answer is no, because they can't have a response to it.
That's interesting. Do you have any studies to back this up, or are you just pulling this out of your ass? Because if that's true, then that's some groundbreaking shit right there. And the scientific community would honestly love to get their hands on your research so they could find a way to make vaccines more effective. But I haven't been seeing any sources or reference throughout this video, so I'd be willing to bet that you just pulled it out of your ass. Also, as a side note, immune systems don't work in this false dichotomy that you've presented. There are a myriad of factors. Sure, diet is one factor, but so are a person's genes. And even if I were to grant you the absurd idea that diet and exercise are the only things that affect the immune system, people vary widely. Not everyone will either have a perfect diet and exercise regimen or a horrible one. Some people will have good diets with no exercise, some will exercise and have poor diets, and others will fall in the middle, with okay diets and a moderate amount of exercise. This is where I think most people would fall, actually. They try to eat right, but also enjoy fast food occasionally. You know, they don't exercise religiously, but they go for a jog a few times a week or something similar. So even if I grant your false dichotomy in what causes an immune system to be good or bad, most people will be somewhere in the middle where vaccines would be helpful.
Nobody questions whether vaccines contain toxic chemicals or not. The real debate is whether or not the toxic chemicals are contained in large enough quantities to actually injure the person.
What's that? You understand dosage? So why the hell would you play that clip of the doctor who rants about how he doesn't care about the parts per million? Toxic is toxic. I'm skipping past most of the next guy because all he basically does is say that the Supreme Court has awarded damages to people that have sued for vaccine injury. This is true. They have. But a Supreme Court ruling does not make it good science. There are some definite risks with regards to vaccines, and while the odds are hugely against them, they do happen. But the Supreme Court has issued awards to people who have sued because of the onset of autism. Autism is definitely not connected to vaccines. This has been studied literally thousands of times, and the only paper that found a link was the one by Dr. Wakefield, which, even had the results not been tampered with, would have been far too small to show a statistically significant link. So that's one confirmed fraudulent paper versus thousands of legitimate papers. So yeah, basically Supreme Court rulings don't change the science.
The problem is that now we're finding that these substrates also contain other harmful additives like glyphosate. So glyphosate, which is Roundup, which is a pesticide, pesticide made by Monsanto, is making its way into the vaccines as well. So,
if you're going to make ridiculous claims, at least get your terms right. Roundup is not a pesticide, it is just an herbicide, meaning it kills plants, not bugs. It's also one of the safest ones you can use, as it is absorbed by the plants you spray it on, and then physically blocks that plant from absorbing water. Not chemically, it's not a chemical poison, it's just a physical obstruction to absorbing water, and that's how it kills the plants. It's also very biodegradable to the point where you can spray it all over your garden, and within 24 hours you can safely plant your plants, as it will have all broken down by then. Now, all that being said, this claim is just plain false. There was one test done by a lab in St. Louis, a test that was not precise enough to detect the amounts of glyphosate that it claimed to have found. Some known quack authors then wrote a study which has never been published or released for peer review. Basically, the testing method that the lab used was a screening test, which other labs would use to determine if further testing is needed to determine the precise quantities. It is a test that commonly results in false positives and is only reliable in a solution of water, not vaccine adjuvant. Link to an article all about this down below. I'm also skipping the remaining crap about glyphosate, as it all relies on this very flawed study that I just mentioned, and the article that I linked to debunks it very nicely. Also, they imply that vaccines cause ADHD. Then they go back to talking about how scary surfactants are, including polysorbate 80, the nice natural surfactant that you can buy on eBay.
The question has to be asked, do vaccine materials enter the brain? No studies.
So I did a Google Scholar search for vaccines and brain, and it came up with more than 200,000 results. Now, I'm a reasonable guy, so I understand that not all of these will be about that specific topic, so let's pick one that is. Here. It's called Aluminum Adjuvanted Vaccines Transiently Increase Aluminum Levels in Murine Brain Tissue. So there's one. No, I'm not buying the study to see its conclusions, but let's see how many times this study has been cited. Oh, look at that. 25 times, most of which are studies on aluminum adjuvanted vaccines and their effect on the brain. Oh, look down here. There's a Find More Content Like This link. Let's see. Look at that. Over 16,000 studies similar to that one. So that was a flat-out lie. I'm pretty sure that if all of these studies were coming up with how bad vaccines are and how much harm they do to our brain, you would be all over it. Your complete lack of knowledge on the matter is either laziness, in that you assume that there are no studies because you haven't seen any shared on Facebook or something like that, or it's incompetence, as in you have no idea how to find a study on a particular subject, or you are being deliberately deceptive. I would like to think that people discussing the health of our children are not deliberately deceptive, but you're making that really, really hard.
If vaccine materials get into the brain, what happens? 1 in 6 children with neurodevelopmental disabilities, 1 in 50 with autism, 1 in 10 with ADHD, 1 in 20 below the age of 5 with seizures. Until proven otherwise.
Dude, that is not how the burden of proof works. If you are claiming that vaccines cause autism, you need to substantiate that shit. Especially since it most certainly has been proven otherwise thousands of times. Not sure about the other ones, but I don't really feel the need to look into it, as you are not meeting your burden of proof. Scientists do not have some obligation to test every wild accusation you can think to make. Show your evidence for the connection, then it will be tested, and has been in the case of autism. Alright, that's all the time I have for this one so far. I may continue with the series, I may not. It mostly depends on where they go. There are a lot of repeat claims that they just try to drill into you as you watch, and it does get rather tedious. I will at least finish with this episode, so part 2 will be up next week. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter and Minds, and I'll see you next time.